night in San Antonio, but they held on to win by 3. LeBron sat out the game with a strained calf muscle. Anthony Davis stepped up with 37 points and 10 rebounds. The Clippers are back in action tonight against Golden State at Crypto.com. They won't have to worry about Draymond Green. It looks like a lot of NBA teams won't be seeing the Golden State veteran for a long time. The NBA gave Green an indefinite suspension for hitting Phoenix center Yusuf Nurkic in the face Tuesday night. The league is going to take as much time as they want to see if Green figures it out and faces reality. This is the 6th time in Green's 12-year career he's been suspended by the league. He will not be allowed to play again until he proves to NBA officials that he can play the game without committing unsportsmanlike behavior. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
It's the gift-giving season, and we have a gift for you. Visit us online at KBLA.store for holiday savings of 20% off all of our KBLA swag. For the best in merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store right now. And be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all our official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580, at 20% off, but only during the holiday season. Happy holidays.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Oh, what you gonna do? You wanna get down? Tell me. Oh, what you gonna do? Do you wanna get down? Oh, what you gonna do? You wanna get down? Oh, what you gonna do? You wanna get down? Tell me. Get down on it. Get down on it. Get down on it. Get down on it. Come on in. Get down on it. Get down on it. Get down on it. Get down on it. How you gonna do it if you really don't wanna dance? By standing on the wall. Get your back up off the wall. Tell me, how you gonna do it if you really don't wanna dance? By standing on the wall. Get your back up off the wall. 'Cause I heard all the people saying, get down on it. Come on and get down on it. If you really want.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm pleased to have you hanging out with us today in this hour of our program. And in this hour, a conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning author Jefferson Cowie about his best-selling book, Freedom's Dominion, American Freedom. We were just talking about this notion of American freedom with our earlier guest, Paul Rykoff. We continue that conversation now with this amazing author. American freedom is typically, I think, associated with the fight of the oppressed for a better world. But for centuries, whenever the federal government intervened on behalf of the oppressed, many white fellow citizens fought back in the name of freedom, their freedom, to dominate others. As I think about that, my mind goes right back to the conversation we just had, again, with Paul Rykoff, and what the Supreme Court is ultimately going to say about these protesters, these insurrectionists, who stormed the Capitol on January the 6th. This is a moment of reckoning for this experiment in democracy as I see it, and whether or not the Supreme Court will ultimately rule that the government went too far in prosecuting these persons and all of these convictions will be overturned. That would be a major, major travesty in my mind. The government once again coming to the defense of these persons who are basically fighting back, trying to dominate, as is the storyline in this particular book, Freedom's Dominion. Not exactly the same thing, but it certainly brings this present-day situation to mind. But that's what happens over centuries, that many white folk in this country fight back in the name of freedom, but we're really talking about their freedom to dominate other people who look like you and me. So the question is this: how did the notion of freedom become a national alibi for cruelty and racism and inequity? I am pleased to welcome this Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Jefferson Cowie, on this program right now to discuss his book, Freedom's Dominion. Mr. Cowie, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, and I'm happy to be with you.
I'm delighted to have you on the program. You heard me a moment ago. I'm not sure there's any connection for you, whether you have any comment on that. It's a big, big story. The whole nation, of course, paying attention and watching what the Supreme Court will ultimately do about these persons who stormed the Capitol on January the 6th, and whether or not the government went too far prosecuting them. It would be quite a moment if the Supreme Court were to rule that these persons were, in fact, unfairly charged, and all those convictions trying to overthrow our government would be overturned. Any thoughts about that? Any parallels there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this connects directly to almost all the themes in the book. This is, in my eyes, basically a neo-Confederate uprising against the federal government. And what the federal government's going to do about that is absolutely pivotal. And we see in the entire history of this that the federal government has needed to step in, tame these ideas of federal of sort of white American freedom in overdrive, and be a disciplinarian basically for that, and to bring the rights of especially the democratic rights of other people to the forefront.
Yeah, unpack that comment for me. I'm gonna get straight away into your book. I promise in a moment here. I love the phrase "white American freedom in overdrive." Unpack that statement for me, will you?
Well, throughout history, what we see is almost every branch of the government does the work essentially of the white majority. That's what it's there for. When it doesn't, when it goes against that and sides with Native American people or black people or whatever the case may be, that is often seen as an incursion on the white idea of freedom, because this is a white republic, right? So we see a great deal of animation, political hyperbole, kind of overstatement, ridiculous oftentimes kinds of things. That's why I opened with this sort of speech by George Wallace about these things, in which this whole idea of freedom seems to be under attack, and the basic values of America are under attack because the federal government is not doing the work of the white majority. Yeah,
you do open the text with the words of George Wallace. Tell me what George Wallace had to say about these issues.
Right. So George Wallace was the segregationist governor of Alabama, and he ran for president several times: 64, 68, 72, and 76. But he's most famous for this speech he gave in 1963 as his governor, first day as governor's inaugural address. And that's when he said, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, which everybody's read in a textbook or something someplace. But I went back and looked at that speech very carefully. And he mentioned segregation, including those three moments, 4 times. He mentions freedom 24 times. So in this way, what we see is not a simple question of segregation, which is not a simple question, of course. It's a very complicated question. But what we're seeing is George Wallace appealing to a fundamental American value, a core principle of the ideology of the Republic, freedom. And he saw the Civil Rights Act, as he called it, the assassin's knife in the back of liberty. Right? This is the Civil Rights Act. This is one of the great leaps forward in freedom for people in the United States. But it was working against the interests of the white South in George Wallace's eyes. So what we see is sort of this person we would normally see as an oppressor, right? Is actually appealing to the idea of freedom to do the work of his oppression. Yeah. And historically, we tend to dismiss that idea of freedom, but I think it's actually really core. So if you think of, say, the Freedom Caucus today, that's a very, in my opinion, very oppressive group of people who are using the word freedom, and not just as window dressing, but they actually see themselves pursuing this idea of freedom to dominate.
I want to come to that point. The book is called Freedom's Dominion. I think you get the link now. And speaking of Alabama and George Wallace, we'll go right to Alabama, specifically a place called Barber County, Alabama, which is at the epicenter of this text, Freedom's Dominion. But we'll start when we come forward with this comment he makes just now, Jefferson Cowie makes just now, about the Freedom Caucus in the House. We've been talking for weeks now. You heard Paul Rykoff and I, again, discussing this last hour about this band of rebels inside the House. They call themselves the Freedom Caucus. They're the ones who are upending and trying to upend everything. But when they use the word freedom, or moreover, when you hear the Fox News host use the word freedom, that ain't exactly the same definition that I have when I use the word freedom. It's not what King was talking about when he used the word freedom, Dr. King. We'll talk about these two these distinctly different meanings of freedom when they use that word and when we use that word when we come forward with Pulitzer Prize winning author Jefferson Cowie on Tavis Smiley.
From Lamert Park with love, this is Tavis Smiley.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac, perfected like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since '92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shout it, don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly we're hustling. Bustin', truckin'. Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit Cadillac.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with NCHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
Did you know there's a way to outsmart COVID if you get it? Now there are medicines that can treat COVID, whether or not you've been vaccinated, which is great news, especially if you're over 50. If taken in the first 5 days of having symptoms, COVID medicines can help stop the illness from getting serious. Call a healthcare provider or the statewide COVID hotline at 833-422-4255 to learn more about COVID medicines. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
Teachers are dynamic leaders shaping a new generation. They bring a variety of perspectives from diverse backgrounds, innovating how they teach to prepare students for our fast-changing world. They're skilled experts, discovering a universe of solutions, telling stories, inspiring, mentoring, connecting cultures, leading by example. Teaching is a journey that shapes lives. Are you ready? Explore teaching at teach.org, supported by the U.S. Department of Education and 1 million teachers of color.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the exclusive media sponsor of this light of ours, activist photographers of the Civil Rights Movement. A dynamic new exhibition on view now at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. This light of ours showcases more than 150 photos taken by movement insiders from diverse backgrounds that reveal the vital work undertaken by a broad coalition of organizers and everyday people whose collective action changed America. This light of ours is one of 3 temporary exhibitions currently on view at the Skirball, which together explore issues related to civil rights, immigration, and pluralism. Tickets and more information for all 3 exhibitions are available at skirball.org. That's skirball.org. SKIRBALL.org.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Jefferson Cowie, I have a funny feeling, a sneaky suspicion that when King is talking about freedom at the March on Washington, as he closes that amazing, iconic speech, I have a feeling that what King was talking about when he used the word free and freedom is not exactly what the Freedom Caucus means in the House when they use the word freedom, sir.
Nothing gets past you. Yes, sir. You are. Yeah, and the King speech comes just months after Wallace's speech when he mentions freedom 24 times. So that, this conflict goes all the way back, and that's part of my project. Actually, is to kind of move away from this flawed idea of freedom and begin to think much more about democracy and the tools and the institutions and the compromises that are necessary to actually build democracy.
Yeah.
There's just too much history of oppression in the word freedom.
Yeah, why is that term, again, I'm going to follow you through this conversation the entire hour, why is that term freedom to your mind so flawed? I mean, it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare to have a guest on this program or any place else in this country who is so honest and so transparent and so willing to say that the notion of freedom that we wrestle with in this country is flawed. That's a bold statement in and of itself. You can get in trouble in certain places for saying you said that on Fox News, they'll run you off the network if you say freedom is flawed. But here you are saying it now, so unpack it for me.
Well, that's why I'm talking to you, not Fox.
Which I appreciate, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we go all the way back to where freedom comes from as an idea, it's actually rooted in ancient Greek societies, and what it basically meant was to not be a slave. And so if we take that one step further, it meant not just to not be a slave, it also meant the capacity to enslave. So right at the beginning of the idea of freedom in the Western world, freedom means not just not to be a slave, but actually to have the power and the freedom to dominate others, to enslave others. You take that idea, which is essentially a good idea, not being a slave, and you put it in the American South. And here we have a settler colonial project, a chattel slavery project, where that dark aspect of freedom that's mixed in with good elements of freedom, the political community and politics and First Amendment rights and all those kinds of things that we like. But you put that into this settler colonial chattel slavery world, and that dark note of freedom really begins to grow and dominate. And what we see is freedom when the South secedes from the North, they are doing that to protect their freedoms. And it's kind of hard when Barber County, for instance, solicits, has a petition for freedom from the North. When they secede from the Union, they basically said, are we going to stand up like free men? And what that meant was, are we going to be able to protect our capacity to enslave others? And that's a pretty dark problem, right? Because this is the core value of America, this idea of freedom. And my project is to get us to rethink some of those things.
Yep. What does your research tell you about how that core value got so twisted in the first place?
Yeah, I think it was twisted from the get-go. I think if you can unpack freedom into a host of things. So first thing we love about freedom is the idea of freedom from oppression, freedom from the state, freedom, First Amendment and Fourth Amendment and all the kinds of things we celebrate about freedom. Then there's another element that we often don't take seriously enough, and that is your freedom to participate in the political community, your ability to vote, your ability to enter the public sphere. But the third element is the one I'm worried about, and that's the freedom to dominate, the freedom to oppress. And theoretically, at least, one person's freedom will start short of somebody else taking over their lives. But in reality, that is not the practice of freedom. Yeah. The practice of freedom is a much more vicious system. Yeah. And in fact, those first two elements of freedom, the ability, the First Amendment type things and the political participation things, are often used most effectively in the Deep South to protect that third freedom, that freedom to dominate. And that's a really dark problem.
I love the way you broke down those three aspects of freedom, which leads me to ask what you make of the irony, and irony is the best word I can think of, that while freedom is ostensibly at the epicenter of what we mean and what we mean to suggest when we use the word democracy, freedom is at the epicenter of that, and yet it is that bastardization of freedom that's challenging the very future that's at the center of the fragility of our democracy right now. Does that make sense?
That is. Now the question becomes, is it a bastardization or is it central?
Oh, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you flipping my question like that. I love it. Okay. Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me.
Well, I struggled with that throughout the book because most people will say, well, maybe if you're invoking freedom for depressive ends, you're just using it as a bastardization, a window dressing, a way to twist the world to get what you want, because we all love freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually dig into this question, there's a core dimension of this freedom that's always been with us that is not a bastardization, but it's actually central to the entire westward expansion, slavery, some of the worst aspects of the American experience.
Mm-hmm. You got me thinking now.
That's my job.
Yeah, you're doing it well. While you got me thinking, let me ask you to take me and the audience to Barber County, Alabama. It is, speaking of epicenter, it is central. Speaking of central, it is central to this text. You mentioned George Wallace earlier, but take me to Barber County, Alabama, and just unpack this for me.
You bet. Yeah. So when I wrote this book, I was interested in this question of freedom and what was wrong with it and what was right with it. And I wanted a place to tell stories. So I found this county in Alabama where George Wallace is from, but that's not really why I selected it. And I traced it, this little obscure spot in the southeast corner of the state, across the river from Georgia. And I start with Native American removal, the Creek Muskogee people's removal from Barber County. And what happens is that basically the federal government, white settlers come into what was then known as the Creek Nation and take it over. And the federal government, surprisingly, sends troops in to pull white people out of the Creek Indians' land. It's sort of not what we think about. And in fact, white troops burned the town down and all this kind of stuff. So what happened at the birth of this place is a hatred for the federal government, because the federal government was coming in and protecting Native American rights. Now, that's not a typical story all the time, but it is one story. And what we see right there is a kind of white freedom against federal authority. And that's kind of the core tension of the book that works out throughout the rest of the book. And that really hits its stride in the Civil War and Reconstruction sections, where federal power during Reconstruction, which a lot of people are thinking about right now, which is the era in which the federal government came into the Deep South, reordered race relations, political rights, the whole thing, at federal bayonet point, right? They basically said, no, these people now have the right to vote. These freedmen have the right to vote, and you need to. And what we see at that point is flourishing of a biracial democracy in Barber County. In fact, the only black person to be elected from that region of the country to Congress, the only African American in the entire history of the United States, was during Reconstruction. And of course, what the white people saw was federal stripping of their rights, of their freedoms, and their freedom to dominate black people in Barber County. So in 1874, when all the black voters from the rural countryside came to the major city and they lined up to vote, they opened fire on them and they shot them in the streets. 80 people were shot, at least. We don't know the actual number. That's the recorded number. And that ended both federal intervention and true biracial democracy in that place for another 90 years.
Let me go back to that. You are a brilliant historian, and you have done some excellent research in this. But that last comment is arresting for me, and I suspect for many in this audience right now. So I want to go back and just ask you to give me a bit more about that. Now, I want to make sure that I heard you correctly. Of course, I know you did because I've been through the book. I know I heard you correctly. But tell me a bit more about what you just said. These are black people who are lined up to exercise the most precious right we have as Americans, our right to vote, and they were shot and killed while they were standing in line to vote in Alabama.
That's right. And this is not an uncommon story. It began in the Colfax Massacre in 1873, the year before, where essentially they lined people up on their knees and shot them in the back of the head. And so this became known as the White Line, and it was pushing against 10 years of post-Civil War federal intervention in the South that was guaranteeing the right to vote. And the white locals had tried to circumvent this in a variety of political ways. It wasn't working. Ulysses S. Grant, the president, got reelected, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. And this happened on the local level throughout the South. And it was a horrific massacre. And the only reason we actually know that much about it is that the Republican Party, which was the party of civil rights and black voting rights at the time, sent an investigation team down, and we have their reports of exactly what happened. Their interviews with what people, and it's yeah. And so after that, if you were a black Republican, you headed for the hills, or you kept your mouth very, very quiet because violence is the only next thing.
No, I get it. I'm not naive. I'm not naive, of course, in asking this question, but why the massacre? I mean, if you didn't want these black people, these colored folk, these Negroes colored at that point, if you didn't want these colored folk to vote, okay, give me another option. But aside from just being cruel and inhumane, why the massacre? Why shoot them in their head as they're standing in line to vote? There were no other options here?
Well, they had exhausted a number of options. They had tried to steal ballots. They had tried to support an alternative. They actually abandoned the Democratic Party, which is the party of the white South at the time. Mm-hmm. They abandoned that to join the liberal Republicans to try and soften Reconstruction. They had tried just about everything. And finally they said the only way to get rid of black political power in this place is violence. Mm. And that violence they expressed as an expression of their freedom. That's their words.
When you said that this was not in that era, this was not altogether uncommon, do you have any sense of the frequency or how widespread this kind of violence was, shooting black folk in the head while they're standing in line to vote?
Yeah, we're just, it's amazing. So Reconstruction went through a 110-year period of being a kind of bad idea in American history. People thought, we gave black people political rights and it was a disaster. Mm-hmm. We never should do that again. And it was a failure of the federal government. Now we're turning around and going, wait a minute. That's a whole lot of ideology passing as history. Mm-hmm. And what we're learning now is that there was actually a fairly vibrant biracial commitment to democracy in a lot of these local places, backed up by the federal government. And what that means is we're now discovering, as we go back and dig through the archives where the papers are kept on all these things, that there's a tremendous amount of threats of violence and very, very real violence and actual murder.
So
throughout the Deep South.
So when we come forward here in just a moment, I want you to unpack that phrase for me, that this violence, this shooting of black people while they're trying to exercise their right to vote, killing them, massacring them, was backed up by the federal government. What do you mean by that? I want to explore that phrase, that it was backed up, this kind of bad behavior, backed up by the federal government. And I also want to interrogate to these bad actors, these murderers, these white supremacists. How is it, again, no naivete here, but how is it that you can say that you believe in and that you are all about freedom when you hate the federal government? I mean, those two things, for some, I think, are just hard to square. That you're all for freedom, but you hate the federal government. A great deal more to talk about when we come forward. His name is Jefferson Cowie, brilliant historian at Vanderbilt University. His book is called Freedom's Dominion, a saga of white resistance to federal power. And you are listening to Jefferson Cowie right now, and I'm glad about it, on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive. Unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
I'm Ray Harris, and here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The fight between Israel and Hamas is raging on in the Gaza Strip. This comes after Israel started pumping seawater into the sprawling network of tunnels in the region used by the Palestinian militant group. In California, investigators are working on a string of gas station robberies, and they believe they're linked to several more. Armed robbers hit nearly a dozen stations across San Diego County over a 2-hour period this week. The suspects are described as young Black and Latino men wearing hooded sweatshirts and masks. They enter the stores in groups, brandishing guns at the clerks, and demand money and products. And that's the latest. I'm Ray Harris on your home for 24/7 news, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Boost Infinite's new wireless technology gives you 3 networks for the price of 1 and better service at a lower price. Switch today. Visit boostinfinite.com. That's boostinfinite.com.
Is this the dagger?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers were outscored by 15 points in the fourth quarter last night in San Antonio, but they held on to win by 3. LeBron sat out the game with a strained calf muscle. Anthony Davis stepped up with 37 points and 10 rebounds. The Clippers are back in action tonight against Golden State at Crypto.com. They won't have to worry about Draymond Green. It looks like a lot of NBA teams won't be seeing the Golden State veteran for a long time. The NBA gave Green an indefinite suspension for hitting Phoenix center Yusuf Nurkic in the face Tuesday night. The league is going to take as much time as they want to see if Green figures it out and faces reality. This is the 6th time in Green's 12-year career he's been suspended by the league. He will not be allowed to play again until he proves to NBA officials that he can play the game without committing unsportsmanlike behavior. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
They are our love bugs and companions. They are our pets, our family, and they make life better. When we face unexpected challenges, so do our pets. That's why we're on a mission to support people and their pets. Whether donating a bag of kibble, sharing an Instagram post of a lost cat, or welcoming a foster pet into your home, every bit of kindness counts. Visit petsandpeopletogether.org to learn how to be a helper in your community. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
At Susan G. Komen, we believe that ending breast cancer needs all of us working together. Because if you've just been diagnosed and don't know where to turn, we've got you. If you can't afford the treatment you need, we've got you. And if you are driven to honor the loved one you've just lost, we have a place for you here. Because of you, we're supporting those who need help today while tirelessly searching for tomorrow's cures. Visit Komen.org and be a part of our Susan G. Komen community today.
Hey, everything okay?
Yes, I'm fine.
Honey. Hey, I'm here for you. Tell me about school today.
When kids can't find the right words, music can help them sound it out. Talk to the kids in your life about their emotional well-being. Find tools and resources at sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal Ventures.
Only 1 in 5 people with autism are employed, despite many having the skill set and desire to work.
Maybe it's because employers don't know what kind of jobs they can do. Like, what about a programmer?
That's a job for someone with autism.
How about a healthcare worker?
Yep, that is too. People with autism can do a lot of different jobs, but often get overlooked due to outdated stigmas. Introducing WIN by Autism Speaks. We help businesses lead the way in inclusive hiring.
What about a ranch hand?
To learn more, go to autismspeaks.org/win.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
Jefferson Cowie, I think you'll like this. I get all kinds of fascinating messages throughout these shows. This is from one listener, Neo-Confederate Uprising. I'm using that language, Tavis. The Neo-Confederate Uprising, I'm using that. These interviews help so much. This one is so educational, so empowering. I am taking notes, and I am ordering his book. I thought you'd like to hear that. Jefferson Cowie.
I do like to hear that.
So there's that. I'm laughing, but this ain't funny, what I'm about to get into now. So I was just sitting here. Actually, I was walking through the hallways during the break, talking to some of my team members here at the station, and we basically came to a conclusion that the white man is something else. I mean, the white man is a mother, as somebody said in the hallway. I'll leave it there. And what we were talking about is that we at least have some sense, most of us who are African American and who those fellow citizens who just know a bit about history, we have heard, of course, and know rather well the story of the lynchings that took place during this particular period of American history. So we know about lynchings, but until this work and the way you bring it out in Alabama, we don't know so much about these massacres of voters, these massacres of black people standing in line to vote. Before I get to how this was backed up by the federal government, as a brilliant historian, any thoughts on why we know about the lynchings, but not about the massacres of black voters, black would-be voters?
Well, we have pictures of lynchings for one thing. That kind of documentary evidence is very powerful.
Right.
It went all the way up to the 20th century. But if you ask an historian, they'll be able to tell you about Reconstruction and the Reconstruction massacres. And there's a much more interest in it now because it's become clear that this was a lost possibility in American history.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to clarify one thing: the federal power story is kind of the good guy. They're there ensuring black voting rights.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the white people start shooting the voters, they see it as what they call redemption. This is the redemption against sin, against evil, and that sin and evil is actually the federal government that is there to restrain their freedom and allow black people some political rights. So in my story, there's an irony here in which we don't normally think of, like, I have a lousy hero here. And my hero is the federal government because they're the only ones that can come in and take over from this kind of local idea of white freedom and autonomy, freedom's dominion, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked about why people hate the federal government, right?
Yeah, sure.
And before the break, right? And that's key because that was one of the questions I went into this research for. Why do people hate the federal government? And it turns out they don't, as long as it's working for them.
Mm-hmm.
When it begins working for somebody else, that they begin to have suspicions about it. And in the post-Civil Rights Act era, that's what we've seen, right?
Yeah. Two or three things going through my head at one time. I'm just pausing for a second here.
I hear you.
I think I want to start with this. I get it, but tell me about this phrase and how you came up with this as a title, Freedom's Dominion.
Yeah, well, it was a long talk with my editor. But,
that usually happens, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So it was tough. So the idea is that freedom is a space of control, a space of power.
Right.
A place in which authority is built and controlled, and that was connected with freedom. And what we see in my story here, the story of Barber County, Alabama, is this local reign of white freedom has the power on the local level. That's the dominion. And then the federal government comes in every once in a while and mucks everything up for white people and gives Indians rights or black people's rights or something. And then we see this powerful resistance against the federal government on behalf of, propagated by white people.
Yep. What do you?
I should say the elites. There's good white people. It's really the elites that are running this.
Sure. What as a historian, what is your read on this long war on the federal government? We are looking at as we start this conversation talking about what the Supreme Court ultimately is going to say or do about these insurrectionists on January the 6th. So this is nothing new in the history of this country. There are always folk who have disliked government, hated government, pushed back against government, and we saw that play out again on January the 6th in real time. But what does your read of history tell you about this long war on the federal government?
That's exactly what this book is about. Yeah, it's this long war. It starts with land hunger and the federal government, white land hunger against Native Americans, and the federal government trying to put the brakes on that, and then fighting the federal government. It's the same thing with political rights during Reconstruction, where the federal government comes in and grants political or protects political rights for black people. White people rise up against the federal government. And this goes on. I talk about the New Deal. I talk about the Civil Rights era. I talk about the organizing by SCLC and SNCC, all that kind of stuff. It's seen as a threat to white freedom, and that is the source of animus toward federal power.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned lynching earlier.
Sure.
I call the period after Reconstruction, after what white people call redemption, the period of federal government repose. This is when the federal government's pulling back and basically says, all right, we're out of the politics business, and we're not going to protect black people. And we're just going to go, we got enough problems. We got depressions. We got industrial uprisings. We got all sorts of problems. So what happens in this place when the federal government is gone is some of the worst aspects of race relations in American history after the Civil War. We see lynching. We see convict leasing, where black people are sent into the mines against their will. We're seeing the Jim Crow segregationist constitutions on the state level by 1900. All that stuff is happening in a vacuum, a federal vacuum, where the federal government is sort of pulled out and said, you guys on the local level, do your thing.
Yeah.
And it's bad.
I've used the word irony a couple of times in this conversation. I'm going to use it again, so forgive me. But there's another irony here in that in your story, in this particular story, Freedom's Dominion, as you mentioned earlier, the government is really the hero in your story. And yet, where rights and freedoms are concerned, particularly for my people, African Americans, government, as you know, has also been the center of the problem. But for our court system, and here's another irony, but for the court system then, not today, but for the court system and but for interposition and nullification and amendment and protest, we wouldn't be where we are today as fully recognized or almost fully recognized citizens in this experiment in democracy. So it's fascinating irony that the government is the hero in this particular story, but again, where rights and freedoms of black folk are concerned, so often the government has been the villain.
That's right. You have nailed the sort of ironic, as you put it, or contradictory nature of the book. And so the federal government you have to think of it as a sort of potential energy, because keeping things on the local level is not going to solve the problem for anybody, because that's really where race relations play out. The federal government is the only power, and I call it my hero, but it's like this clay-footed, weak-kneed, two-faced hero.
There you go.
It's a really lousy protagonist to have as your hero in a book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when it does act, that's when the breakthroughs are. After the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, parts of the New Deal, not all the New Deal. All that sort of stuff. And what we see is kind of, 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps back, right? And
Well, speaking of steps forward, when we take a step forward and continue this conversation, I want to get a bit philosophical here, and obviously, as a brilliant historian, you can handle this. You wrote the book about it. But I am curious as to whether or not, how do I want to phrase this? I'm curious as to whether or not freedom in this place called America can ever be disentangled from oppression. It seems to me that it's the yin and yang, right? I don't know that you can disentangle freedom from oppression, as much as I don't want to admit that, but I do want to interrogate it. We'll ask that question of Jefferson Cowie, author of the book Freedom's Dominion, a saga of white resistance to federal power, when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good. Yeah, man. Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Get ready for holiday feast season with Pepto-Bismol.
Uncle Derek's here with his famous fried turkey. Hey, Aunt Mary brought the mac and cheese. Donna's here with the potato salad.
Pepto-Bismol provides fast 5-symptom relief for unexpected stomach upsets. So enjoy the holidays. Pepto has you covered, no matter who made the potato salad.
When you have nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
Pepto-Bismol. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin ultra strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, yeah, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
For some children, a single surgery can turn an untreated cleft into a smile for life. But at Smile Train, we understand that most children need a little extra care. They need medical, dental, and emotional resources to grow healthy and strong, to express themselves clearly, and to navigate all of life's challenges so that their smiles light up the room as brightly as possible. Visit SmileTrain.org to learn how Smile Train is supporting the cleft community with lifelong smiles.
He's rooting for everybody black. Everybody black. More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Jada Pinkett Smith called it an entanglement. I want to talk in a moment about disentanglement and whether or not one can disentangle notions of freedom and notions of oppression in this country. We'll do that in just a second. After I tell you that this book by our author, Jefferson Cowie, I'm enjoying this immensely, as I'm sure many of you are. The book is called Freedom's Dominion, a saga of white resistance to federal power. That book is out in paperback. I have a hard copy of it, thank God for Jesus. But the book comes out in paperback on January. I'm a serious book collector, so I've got hard copy stuff. But the book comes out in paperback on January the 2nd. I know some of you are already letting us know that you're ordering the book even as we speak, or even as he speaks. But it's out in paperback on January the 2nd, hence I wanted to get him on today. He's the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for this book, Freedom's Dominion: A Saga of White Resistance to Federal Power. I said earlier, Jefferson, that I've got a really smart audience, and I love this question. I wish I thought about it. I can't even take credit for it, so I'll give credit to where credit is due. But someone asked this question. I want to post it right quick here before I get to that. Tavis, I am interested to know how Professor Cowie teaches this at Vanderbilt when there's so much white fragility these days. How do you teach this stuff, given all the white fragility that we read and hear about every day, where we don't want to teach certain things because people's feelings get hurt?
That's a great question, and I have had, maybe it's because I'm white, I can get away with it. I don't know, but if I stand up with a bunch of students, and I have, big lectures and small seminars, and I present the facts and I show them the documents and we read them, and they have a very kind of humble response to when it's because it's not in a hothouse. We're sitting down and we're deliberating very methodically what the material, the sources say. And I have found them fairly resilient and curious, actually. So I think that fragility is in the public sphere, very obviously. But I think when you really sit down with folks and reason together, you can get to the bottom of it.
I love it. I'm happy to hear that, especially at a place like Vanderbilt in the Deep South. So that's encouraging news. That's very encouraging news. In our remaining moments with Jefferson Cowie, we'll get to that final question, that exit question, as to whether or not his read of history suggests that we can ever, historically or in the future, disentangle notions of freedom from notions of oppression. We'll do that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
She's so smooth, I'm interrupting my own shower to remind you to treat your skin like the queen she is with Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash, packed with Olay's highest level of vitamin B3 complex. It's so moisturizing that it will give you visibly smoother, head-turning skin in just 14 days. People wondering, how'd she get so smooth? Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash. Also, try Olay Hyaluronic Body Lotion.
Heart failure, carpal tunnel syndrome, shortness of breath, stomach issues, lower back pain. How does it all add up? If you have heart failure and any of those seemingly unrelated symptoms sound familiar, it's time to talk with your cardiologist and get the full picture. They may add up to transthyretin amyloid cardiomyopathy. ATTR-CM is a rare and underdiagnosed disease. Recognize the signs and discuss them with your doctor soon. Learn more at connectwithyourheart.com. That's connectwithyourheart.com. Sponsored by Pfizer.
On your period, sudden gushes happen without warning. But now, you can say goodbye to stand-up gush fears. Thanks to Always Ultra Thins with rapid dry technology. It absorbs gushes 2 times faster than the leading store brand and gives you up to 100% leak-free protection. Hello, clean and comfortable with Always Fear No Gush.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
I think our exit question, or certainly one of our exit questions, Jefferson Cowie, is what I posed moments ago, and that is whether or not your research, your read of history suggests that historically or even into the future, we can ever truly disentangle our notion of freedom from the ways in which various peoples have been, are now, and sadly may be for the foreseeable future oppressed in a variety of ways.
I think they are too inextricably linked for my tastes and my values. And I would like to take it apart. And when we're talking about freedom, let's talk about, what are we talking about? We're talking about voting rights? Great. Let's talk about voting rights. Talking about labor rights? Great. Let's talk about labor rights. We're talking about discrimination. We're talking, what is it? Let's be clear. The demands for freedom ends up being sort of two vague ideas up against each other that's not productive. So I want to get into the nitty gritty. I'd love to share an example with your listeners. After the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, Martin Luther King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, sent out young organizers throughout the South to organize voters. And then when the results came in, his lieutenant, a guy named Hosea Williams, was trying to figure out why some counties had really good organizing drives and some counties had lousy ones. And he's like, that county has good leadership, but bad numbers. This one has bad leadership, good numbers. This one was done by SPLC. This one was done by SNCC. What's going on? I can't figure this out. And finally, he figures out the problem. And the problem is, or the key is, the counties that had good numbers of registration had federal registrars on the ground in the counties. And it didn't matter who was doing the organizing or how charismatic they were or how good they were at the speechifying. It was whether there's a federal registrar there. And those counties had good numbers, and the ones without federal authority did not. And so he basically says, look, freedom depends on this like nitty-gritty idea of having a federal registrar on the ground to make sure these people have the rights they are guaranteed in the 14th, 15th Amendment. So that when I think about freedom, I think about that. That's freedom. It's not some big cloud that we can appeal to. It's a thing.
As we move into a period, as you well know, given your historian status, we're moving into a period in the not-too-distant future where for the first time ever, this country will be majority-minority. We've never lived in an America where the minorities combined outnumbered the white majority. We are headed toward that moment inexorably in the future of this country, which leads me to ask as the exit question, I believe, how you read, pull out your crystal ball, Jefferson Cowie, and tell me how you read white grievance politics into the future. White grievance politics into the future.
Yeah, no, that's never ask an historian about the future.
Only the past, right? That ain't what you do. I get it. Okay, you're out of your wheelhouse now, but answer it anyway.
Right, but that is the question, and whether demographics is really enough.
Right.
Because I actually think that the institutions are really what's going to matter, and having those. Obviously, the institutions will be a reflection of some of those demographic changes. But when we see things like the Holder decision or the possibility of letting the protester, the rioters off the hook for January 6th and the rest, we're talking about deeply flawed institutions. And so for me, the struggle is there. And I'm hoping that majority-minority culture will be able to have an impact on those institutions.
We will see in the coming days what our present iteration of the Supreme Court will do and say about these white grievance politics that we saw play out on January 6th in the insurrection.
It really matters.
It does matter. I ain't holding my breath on it, but it does matter. His name is Jefferson Cowie, amazing author, the James G. Stallman Chair in History at Vanderbilt University, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for the book Freedom's Dominion, a saga of white resistance to federal power. Professor Cowie, I've enjoyed this immensely. Congrats on the Pulitzer Prize. Congrats on the text, and thank you for this conversation so immensely, and have a happy holiday season, sir.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you today.
It's an honor to have you on this program. When we come forward in our final hour, the world's #1 vocal coach is in the building, in studio. You don't want to miss Cheryl Porter on Tavis Smiley.
KBLA 1580.
Seawater into the sprawling network of tunnels in the region used by the Palestinian militant group.